22 movies, 22 real incidents, 7 levels. Let's start at the tip of this iceberg. Level 1. Man in the Windshield. Stuck is a horror thriller about a young caregiver who drives home with a man stuck in her windshield. In the film, early that night, Brandy, the caregiver, goes out, mixes alcohol with pills, and decides to drive in that intoxicated state. The next moment, she hits Tom hard enough for his body to end up lodged halfway in the passenger side through the windshield. He is badly hurt, but still conscious and right in front of her. Instead of stopping and calling for an ambulance, Brandy keeps going until she reaches home with Tom still trapped in the glass. Brandy knows calling 911 will bring paramedics and police, which could destroy her promotion chances. So, once in the garage, she closes the door on him and walks away.
I'm sorry. It wasn't my fault. You should have watched where you were going.
In the final act of Stuck, Tom keeps trying to free himself and finally manages to push out of the windshield and starts crawling across the garage floor. That escape makes Brandy panic, and she grabs anything she can to chase him across the backyard. The fight between them spills into the road, and the chaos ends in a way that has no link to the real case. Brandy is struck by a passing car and dies in the street, while Tom survives.
Help me, please. Help.
But in the real case, Gregory Biggs, Tom in the film, never escaped. On October 26, 2001, Shantae Mallard, aka Brandy, called her friend Cleet Jackson instead of the police, and he arrived with his cousin Herbert Cleveland. They moved Gregory's body to Cobb Park to stage a random hit and run and tried to clean and burn the car. The cover-up hit national news as the windshield, and the jury sentenced Mallard to 50 years for plus extra time for tampering. Endless River. In Jungle, Yossi and Kevin are seen riding their flimsy raft downstream, trying to stay away from the worst of the current. But it suddenly swings sideways, slams into rocks, and breaks apart.
Get your paddle! Get your paddle! Come on! Quick! Get your paddle! Paddle, Yossi! Come on! Paddle! Jesus, he's too hot!
Kevin manages to swim toward one bank while Yossi gets dragged into deeper water and swept around a bend, completely out of sight. After a while, he finally claws his way out of the river and drags himself onto the mud. And the first thing he does is start shouting for Kevin.
Kevin!
But no one answers. Yossi tries to walk back upstream, convinced Kevin must be nearby. However, steep banks and fast water keep blocking his path. The movie then locks onto Yossi's world shrinking to one rule: follow the river and stay moving. Each time he's forced away from the river, he ends up farther from where he started, which slowly makes it clear he might be on his own now. Yossi's strength drops fast, causing him to slip, stumble, and react slower to surroundings. Moreover, getting close to water to drink is another risk because one wrong step could throw him back into the current he barely survived. Yossi spent 4 full days searching for Kevin along that river. After that, he was alone in the jungle for almost 3 weeks with nothing to survive on. As the film pushes toward the end of his ordeal, Yossi stops trying to escape the jungle and focuses on surviving long enough for anyone to find him. He sets up tiny resting spots, moves slower, and saves every bit of energy he can. The sequence finally breaks when Yossi hears a faint motor in the distance. He uses what little strength he has left to crawl back toward the riverbank and wave. A small boat appears, and the men on board get closer. When they come in range, Yossi is shocked to see his friend Kevin on board, and finally collapses. The film doesn't exaggerate how unlikely that rescue was. Kevin had made it out of the jungle on his own days earlier, been told Yossi was probably dead, and still refused to accept it. He pushed local boatmen to keep searching the river until almost 3 weeks after the accident, they happened to pass the exact stretch of bank where Yossi was standing. In real life, things didn't line up as neatly as the movie makes them seem.
My life was spared. I mean, I know Kevin saved my life, but it was a miracle. For sure, it was a miracle.
Events were more spread out, choices were messier, and a lot of moments came down to confusion and luck rather than clear turning points. The rescue was real, but getting there took longer and felt far less controlled than the film lets on. When the rig blew. In Deepwater Horizon, thick mud shoots out of the well and turns a drilling shift into a fight for survival. As the pressure climbs, mud slams onto the deck, and before anyone can make sense of the readings, the floor begins shaking, pushing the operators to act blindsided. One of them moves toward the control panel and tries to bring the well under control. Instead, the pressure climbs higher. Gas detectors sound alarms across the rig, indicating that something deeper is moving toward them. When BP managers step in, they treat the odd readings as harmless, just to get over their job, and that starts the domino effect. Once displacement begins, the rig feels wrong in quiet but steady ways. Mud levels in the pits rise in patterns no one can explain. The flow coming out grows stronger instead of easing back. Some workers clear alarms and reset sensors to clean up the noise on their panels, which buys them a tiny amount of relief. However, that calm slips away when the readings drift again, worse than the last. That pressure keeps building until the well finally snaps. Mud blasts out of the hole and slams across the deck. Gas rides the mud into rooms that were supposed to stay sealed. The whole structure shakes like it might pull apart. A spark catches the gas. Fire shoots through the rig, turning hallways into burning tunnels. The crew is forced to split across the rig with almost no way to reach each other. The rig ultimately sinks, and survivors gather on a supply vessel covered in mud, oil, and burns.
When we get to the very last step, about 8 of us, the other lifeboat starts descending.
They're leaving without you?
They have left without the captain and without knowing that they had everyone that had survived all this on board.
The real Deepwater Horizon disaster grew out of a chain of rushed choices on the Macondo well. When the blowout preventer failed to seal it, oil poured into the Gulf of Mexico for 87 days, spreading across the water and coast while cleanup crews worked for months. The movie focuses on the single night everything collapsed, but the real damage and investigations stretched on long after the fire went out. Level 2. Deadly Fire. In Only the Brave, 19 firefighters step off a burned ridge toward a spot they thought was safer, unaware that fire was already on their route. The film moves straight into this shift. The crew walks downhill in a tight line while smoke builds ahead, moving toward a nearby ranch marked earlier as a safety zone. Wind picks up, breaking their radio calls and darkening the air.
All right, hey, I'm at the dozer.
Copy.
Hey, man, it's too close. I gotta move.
Donut, stay calm. Follow the 2-track road. That's your escape route.
Judging distance becomes harder, yet they push forward. The crew slows, trying to read the ground through a wall of ash. The breaking point arrives when the fire reaches the stretch of brush ahead of them. Retreat is no longer an option, so the crew switches from movement to survival. Tools drop, a patch of ground is scraped clear, and the shelter comes out in one practiced motion.
Get your feet to the fire! Tyler, get your water! Feet to the fire! Looking on the inside!
The film stays outside the shelter as the fire sweeps through the basin, so the moment of impact is felt through the burnover rather than shown directly. Once the flames pass, the story follows the search crews and the town as they wait for news. Brendan McDonough becomes the only hotshot left. Families and crew members gather in silence around the 19 names that now define the film's ending.
I mean, I was still with our vehicles in one of the buggies, and I could hear whoever didn't bring their phone, I could hear phones ringing, knowing that it was their wives, their family. I sunk into my seat, I sunk into myself. I couldn't think.
That site later became the Granite Mountain Hotshots Memorial State Park, where people still hike out to leave patches, helmets, and small tributes in the spot that holds their final footprints. Evil Widow. In a widow's game, a man lies beside his car in an underground garage. His wife, Maria, rushes in crying as if the attack came out of nowhere.
Pero vamos, que yo acabo de llegar de trabajar y llevaba toda la mañana sin contestarme al teléfono. Ahora al ver todo esto.
Lo siento.
Detective Ava studies the scene and notices how nothing is stolen. There's no real struggle, and the space feels controlled instead of chaotic. That pushes her away from the idea of a random mugging and toward a planned hit by someone who knew Antonio's routine.
La cartera estaba intacta. De momento descartamos el móvil del robo. Dinero y amor. Tiradme todos los bolos, ¿eh? Su mujer es enfermera, ¿no? Mirad también por ahí.
From there, the film stays close to Maria's double life, who cries, talks about how much she loved her husband, and plays the shocked widow in public. But in private, she skips work to see other men. Each one hears a different version of her story. To one, she's separating. To another, she's trapped with a controlling partner. One of those men is Salva, a nurse who grows attached the more she leans on him. Maria walks Salva through Antonio's schedule, explains that he always uses the same underground garage, points out his car, and gives Salva a way to get inside without drawing attention.
Pero le pondré una excusa para que lo meta aquí la noche antes. Esta es la llave para que puedas entrar.
That access is what makes the attack possible. Salva gets into the garage because Maria has already shown him how it works. Arturo walks in expecting a normal routine, so Arturo doesn't realize danger is close until it's too late. The stabbing itself stays off-screen. Ava's team soon pulls phone records and chat logs and finds that Maria's grief in front of family sits beside romantic, playful messages to Salva and other lovers. That split makes it impossible to treat her as a harmless victim. Interrogation closes in on Maria, who repeats her original story, only this time, Ava answers with screenshots and recordings. She asks who had the garage keys, who knew Antonio's routine, and why Maria met Salva right after police mentioned a suspect. The film ends with both Maria and Salva convicted.
En la anterior declaración, yo dije que fue cosa mía solamente, pero fue cosa de los dos.
¿Ella le pide a usted?
Sí.
But in real life, the film mirrors the 2017 Patres case in Valencia. A jury sentenced Mahe, the wife, to 22 years as the instigator and Salva to 17 as the killer. Spanish media labeled her the Black Widow of Patres, followed her new relationship in prison and the birth of her child when Antonio was mostly remembered as the man ambushed next to his car. If this story shows how far real people can go when obsession takes over, make sure to subscribe because the next cases cross boundaries you would never expect. Level 3. Homemade Murder. The film Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer opens with a woman in a quiet field while soft music plays. Henry drives away as if nothing unusual happened, which quietly frames his violence as part of everyday life, rather than some big turning point. The story then settles into his small Chicago apartment. Henry lives with Otis, an unstable ex-con, and Otis's teenage sister Becky. On the surface, it looks like three broke people sharing a boring life, but soon violence slips into that routine without warning. Henry and Otis go for a drive, chat with a woman in the car, and the next shot cuts straight to her body by the side of the road. Later, they visit a man at work and pretend to be customers. Next time we see that room, he's on the floor and his car is gone.
Look at the world. It's either you or them. You know what I mean.
Because the attacks stay off camera, the film keeps snapping from casual chatter to the aftermath. After a while, another body feels like something that fits between beers and TV instead of a huge event. The stolen camcorder pushes the story into its darkest stretch. Henry and Otis pick it up during a robbery, and the next time we see it, the tape jumps to a stranger's living room. The person filming shouldn't be there, and the visit turns tense until the camera drops and the violence spills in from off-screen. Later that night, Henry and Otis watch the tape on their couch like it's casual entertainment.
What are you doing? I want to see it again.
The film draws inspiration from the real Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, but bends their story to keep this tight focus. In reality, Lucas never filmed his crime, so the camcorder scene is a fictional device that turns his casual attitude into something visible. One huge part of Lucas's history never appears at all. After those Texas confessions, he claimed hundreds of murders, and a task force used his statements to close cold cases, only for later checks to show that many of those claims were impossible and that his real body count was much lower than the legend.
You lied to the police, you lied to the families, you've done nothing but lie.
It ain't worth it.
Do you feel ashamed of what you've done?
Unless they put themselves in the type of life I lived. Wouldn't understand.
Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, ignores that whole circus and stays with the smaller picture of 3 people in a cramped apartment, which is exactly why it hits so hard. The Untouchable Killer. In Citizen X, a forensics doctor walks into a field near Rostov expecting one body. Search lines sweep the brush and keep turning up more bones and torn clothes. By the end, there are several victims, many of them children or young women, all killed in similar ways. For investigator Viktor Burakov, this points to one man using the same killing ground for years. Burakov's superiors order him to treat each corpse as a separate case. If they admit that one man is hunting along stations, bus stops, and forest strips, their image would have been ruined. The story keeps cutting to the killer they cannot catch. Andrei Chikatilo drives through small stations and bus stops, watching children and young women. He picks people who are alone, offers them help, then walks them away from platforms into trees and fields.
Have you nowhere to go? Are you hungry?
Their first real chance to stop him comes when patrol officers spot a nervous man with glasses hanging around children at a station. They follow him, search his bag, and find a knife plus other incriminating items.
Please stand, citizen.
Chikatilo.
May I have your bag? Citizen Chikatilo, you're under arrest.
Burakov wants to hold him and build a case, but the arrest hits a wall when crude blood tests say his type does not match traces from some scenes, and he carries a party card. Senior officers trust that combination more than the pattern and release him. After a while, Chikatilo is arrested again, officially on minor charges, but he faces long, aggressive interrogations from prosecutor Gorbanov, who tries to beat a confession out of him. For days, Chikatilo stays calm and repeats denials as the legal deadline for holding him runs out. With almost no time left, Burakov and Fedosov call in a psychiatrist, Dr. Alexander Baranovsky, who sits opposite Chikatilo and reads from his profile. He talks about impotence, humiliation, and the need to regain control through stabbing and cutting. He describes the killer's inner life in cold detail, which finally cracks Chikatilo.
Or possibly a reflection of excess belief in the folktale that the victim's eyes retain an image of the killer even after death.
He confesses to dozens of murders and leads police to dumping sites they haven't even found yet. The film ends with guards taking him into a bare room with a drain in the floor and shooting him in the head. In real life, he was found sane, convicted of 52 murders, and executed with a single shot in the mid-1990s. Hitchhiked to Hell. In Wolf Creek, everything really starts when 3 backpackers' car dies in the middle of nowhere, and the only person who stops to help is the exact man they should never have trusted. The 3 friends are driving through the Australian outback when their car suddenly gives up near the Wolf Creek crater. Hours pass before a truck pulls up and the driver gets out. He introduces himself as Mick Taylor, who seems laid back and helpful. He checks the car over and tells them he can't fix it out here, so he offers to tow them back to his place where there are proper tools.
The only good news is I got the gear to do it. Problem is, it's back at my camp just down the road away. Well, I'm going back down there anyway, so I can give you a tow. Fix it tonight, probably have you on the road by the morning.
The group doesn't really have any options, so they agree to go with him. At the camp, Mick has a fire going, he offers them water, and says he'll look at the car in the morning. The three backpackers relax and start to feel like they've just had a bad day that's finally turning around. But soon the group starts feeling drowsy, and by the time one of them wakes up again, they're no longer just guests around a campfire, they're tied up, hurt, and finally seeing Mick as someone who never planned to let them leave. By the end of the film, two of the backpackers, Liz and Christy, never make it out. They both die while trying to escape Mick, and the police searches never find any traces of them. Ben is the only one who survives. He wakes up nailed to a kind of makeshift cross in one of Mick's mine shafts, manages to free himself, and eventually collapses beside a dirt road where a passing couple find him and get him to a hospital. Since he's the only witness and there's no clear physical trail leading back to Mick, police hold him for months before finally clearing him. Ben's rescue closes the movie on a narrow escape, but the final shot shifts everything back to the wider landscape. Mick walks away with his rifle, unbothered, like the country itself is covering for him. That open ending hits harder once you know the film isn't drawn from a single case. It's stitched together from real outback stories where tourists trusted one driver on a long empty road and vanished into land that stretches for hundreds of kilometers. Level 4. Human Logs. In Men Behind the Sun, a group of Japanese schoolboys settle into life inside Unit 731. At first, their days look like normal military routine. Officers talk about science and progress, which helps sell the illusion that this is a clean, modern facility.
诸位，这就是我石井四郎的新发明，这种东西就叫做低温陶瓷细菌弹。
However, cracks begin to appear when the boys realize the prisoners are not criminals being treated, they are material. Guards call them logs, march them in lines, and treat them like cargo. That mirrors Unit 731's real cover story. New arrivals were counted by number and ethnicity instead of name, so they became items to process rather than people. As the film goes deeper into the compound, the boys move closer to the labs. They see prisoners used in cold experiments. Unit 731 staff infected prisoners with plague, cholera, and other diseases. The goal was to watch how a living body reacted in real time. No one was meant to leave alive. As Japan faces defeat, the unit scrambles to destroy evidence. In real life, that moment came in August 1945 when the Soviet Union invaded Manchuria and advanced toward Harbin. Unit 731 leadership ordered a scorched earth retreat in which buildings were blown up, documents burned, and remaining prisoners killed to remove witnesses. Staff removed insignia from their uniforms and tried to disappear. Incinerators ran constantly while the complex came down around them. The film ends with a sense that justice is still missing, which matches what actually happened. While the Soviets held their trial, intelligence officers negotiated with Shiro Ishii and other leaders, trading immunity for Unit 731's research data. Declassified records later showed American agencies saw clear evidence as invaluable for their own Cold War bioweapon work, and most people behind Unit 731 never even faced a courtroom. In fact, many went on to hold respected positions in universities, hospitals, and industry. Vacation to the Altar. In Borderland, 3 American students cross into a Mexican border town for cheap drinks and a wild night. And by morning, one of them is gone.
He knows we wanted to leave early. What the fuck is wrong with him?
You try yourself.
There's no service.
Ed and Henry treat the strip like any other party stop, so Phil relaxes and follows their lead. However, Phil hangs back for a moment, slips out of their sight, and that tiny gap is all a watching group needs. Suddenly, a truck pulls up, the men move fast, and Phil vanishes before anyone notices.
You know, I'm gonna walk anyway.
The film follows him to a compound outside the city where everyone inside answers to one leader who mixes fear, religion, and money. He claims that ritual sacrifices will keep their business safe from police and rivals, so Phil is locked into a shack and beaten. Back in town, Ed and Henry wake up to find Phil's bed still untouched, meaning he never came back. As the hours pass with no sign of him, they eventually run into a local officer who was used to stories about missing locals and a cult on a ranch outside town. So, he links Phil's disappearance to those rumors and leads the two friends toward the compound. Inside the ranch, the cult starts preparing the next ritual, and Phil hears enough through the shack walls to realize he's next. At the exact moment the officer arrives at the property with Ed and Henry, one of the cult members spots them and opens fire, which blows their cover. As gunshots rip through the yard, people scatter, and the ritual collapses into panic. Amidst the confusion, Phil breaks free when doors are forced open. Some cult members are killed in the exchange, while Ed, Henry, and Phil run for their lives, escaping the ranch. In real life, the story tracks the 1989 abduction and of Mark Kilroy, but it misses one detail. Followers of cult leader Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo actually killed Kilroy, and parts of his remains went into the cauldron they used in ceremonies. The case broke because officers chased a truck that ignored a checkpoint, which led them straight to Santa Elena, where 15 bodies were recovered. Dental records confirmed one as Mark Kilroy. The cult leader fled to Mexico City, and when police closed in, reports say he ordered a follower to shoot him rather than be taken alive. The remaining members were arrested and later received long prison sentences for murder and trafficking. Borderland compresses the real collapse into a rescue that never happened, but the core stays intact. War that eats children. In Come and See, a 14-year-old Belarusian boy named Fliora digs an old rifle out of the sand in his village because he wants partisans to notice him. Partisans show up soon after and take him into the forest like he hoped. At first he thinks he's stepped into the world he imagined, however that feeling fades fast when the commanders decide he's too young.
Трусом никому стать не дадим. Кто болен? Кто не может идти? Поменяйся с новеньким. Он остается.
They keep him around the edges and send him off on errands, and that choice keeps him alive for now. But when he returns home, something feels wrong right away. Houses sit open, food is still on the table, and there's no sound anywhere. He searches room after room, trying to believe everyone simply ran into the woods. Only later does he find the pile of bodies behind the house and understand that soldiers already came through. After that, Fliora is swept along with partisans and scattered villagers. At one point, they reach another village that looks untouched. German troops push the crowd toward a barn. Families are shoved inside at gunpoint and the doors are locked. Then explosives are thrown in. Partisans later catch some of the men who took part in the raid. Fliora stands with the group as they shoot the captured soldiers. On the surface, it looks like revenge, but in reality, nothing in him is restored.
Minderwertige Rassen sind es nämlich, den Bacillus des Kommunismus gebären. Ihr dürft nicht bestehen und die Mission wird erfüllt. Heute oder morgen.
His family is still gone, and the same kind of raids keep hitting other villages. Near the end, Fliora finds a portrait of Hitler lying in the mud. He fires into the picture again and again. This lands hardest when the real numbers behind Belarus's losses come in. More than 9,200 villages were burned or destroyed. Over 600 lost all their people. By the end of the war, Belarus had lost about half its pre-war population through deportations and flight. Fliora himself is fictional, but what he sees is not. Writer Alice Adamovich collected testimonies from survivors in books like Cotton and I Am from the Fiery Village, and director Elem Kimov used those accounts to build the film.
Мальчиком, естественно, я был и видел вот эти бомбежки. Вот поэтому дело в том, что у меня остались очень сильные детские впечатления от этого времени, от этого ада. Я действительно побывал в аду. Вот, и это навсегда осталось, и до сих пор живет во мне.
The burned barns, silent villages, and mass graves in Come and See match what German anti-partisan actions actually did to rural Belarus. Forced poverty. In Mr. Jones, Welsh journalist Gareth Jones slips off a controlled Moscow press trip and heads toward Ukraine to find out how people actually live. Gareth keeps walking to find villages that reflect reality. Each new village proves the opposite. Barns are empty and people are swollen from hunger while their arms look thin and weak. They dig for anything they can eat. This is when he realizes this is not bad luck or one failed harvest. It feels like an entire region is being starved on purpose.
Ой, граф Сталін, ой, граф Сталін, ой, граф Сталін. Аж струни порвались. На Вкраїни люди вмерли, деякі остались.
At the railway line, he sees how trains loaded with grain roll past, guarded by armed men on top of the wagons, so starving villagers cannot climb aboard. Food is being hauled out of a district where nobody has enough to live.
Скажи мне, что случилось? Как вы думаете, что случилось? Они убивают нас. Миллионы погибли.
Near a larger town, officials remind Gareth that he has no right to ask anything without permission. He does not trust them with what he has seen, so he slips away and forces himself back toward Moscow. In Moscow, the pressure shifts to words. British officials hint that attacking Stalin will damage their own plans. Other foreign correspondents warn that if he publishes, he loses access and might take theirs with him. He still goes back to London and writes the story. Walter Duranty soon answers in the New York Times with, "Russia is hungry but not starving," and calmly swats away unnamed alarmists. He never uses Gareth's name, yet his status turns Gareth into the nervous outsider and himself into the voice of reason. That clash shapes the rest of his life in the film. The Soviet Union bans him from returning, so editors and diplomats start treating him as a problem. What wasn't covered in the movie was that decades later, Ukrainian researchers and his family brought out his diaries and famine articles. They matched those with survivor testimony and archives, so his version of man-made hunger held up while Duranty's fell apart. That is why Gareth Jones is now seen as one of the first Western journalists to call the Holodomor a deliberate catastrophe, and as someone who likely paid for that truth with his career and his life. Level 5. Barrels in the Bank. Snowtown opens on a small town bank that looks ordinary. Police force the vault door and step inside. A row of plastic barrels waits against the wall. But once they understand what is inside those containers, years of rumors finally harden into fact.
When I took the lid off the first barrel, I could see what appeared to be a mummified foot that was sort of sticking up. I could see the sole of the foot. There was dirty clothing and a hunched up item sort of filling 3/4 of this barrel.
The film works back to that vault through Jamie's life. He lives with his mom and brothers in a suburb where money is tight and the days feel stuck. So when John Bunting arrives as his mom's new partner, he slots in as a solution. John cooks, jokes, and acts like a protector, which pulls Jamie toward him because he feels like the first adult who actually cares. That trust gives John room to steer the whole house. He fills conversations with talk about sick people and neighbors he calls a threat. Jamie hears these rants long enough that he starts to notice something off. People John rants about end up vanishing.
Wait, look at me. What? It's not freaking funny. What?
Once the disappearances register, the pressure on Jamie starts to climb. A heavy smell in the shed will not leave his head, so Jamie asks questions but gets a cold warning to drop it. Eventually, police begin asking Jamie about people who once sat at his kitchen table. Jamie realizes he's standing inside something he cannot control, and that fear starts to compete with his loyalty and his need to keep his family safe. That strain leads straight back to the bank in Snowtown. Investigators follow their leads to the disguised building, force the vault, and stop when they reach the barrels. Arrests follow, Jamie hits his limit, and he decides to talk, which brings the full scale of the violence into the open. Snowtown is actually rooted in the real around Adelaide, where John Bunting's group operated for years until welfare irregularities and missing person reports kept pointing toward the same small circle of men. That pattern gave police a clear path to follow, which eventually took them to a rented bank vault in Snowtown and revealed what had been hidden inside. One member, James Vlasakis, later chose to cooperate with investigators.
He was a teenager when he went to jail, but soon James Vlasakis will be released into a world that will look very different. Vlasakis has been granted parole after serving 26 years for his role in one of the world's most infamous crimes, the Snowtown serial killings.
His statements helped officers connect the cases, which led to multiple life sentences and fixed Snowtown's name to one of Australia's most notorious crimes. Hunted in real life. In the Frozen Ground, a teenage dancer rushes out of a pickup truck in Anchorage with cuffs still on her wrists and sprints barefoot toward traffic. A passing driver sees the panic on her face, slows, and she dives into the truck before her kidnapper can reach her.
She's had some older bumps and bruises. The only fresh markings are from the cuffs.
We're gonna need you to come down to the station and go over a few things.
At the station, State Trooper Jack Halcombe listens while she describes the quiet man with glasses, the basement where he chained her, and the small plane waiting in a hangar. She explains that she left her shoes in his car on purpose so police would have something they could trace. Most officers dismiss her because she works the streets, which leaves Halcombe with almost no backup. That doubt pushes him into old files tied to the same blocks she worked. Similar wounds and repeat dump sites line up, so the scatter of reports turns into one pattern: a hunter choosing victims no one rushes to report. While Halcombe builds that pattern, Robert Hansen moves to the wilderness outside the city where he can stalk women who will not be reported quickly. But evidence soon starts to converge. Club workers remember the same awkward customer who offers rides and extra cash. Recovery sites near the Nick River overlap with areas where Hansen likes to hunt wildlife. With every detail pulling in the same direction, Halcombe pushes for a warrant.
He stalks them like his next trophy animal. He walks them and he kills them. He is probably doing it right now. I want a warrant. Now.
Serving that warrant flips the story. Troopers move through Hansen's home and find guns that fit victim injuries and a hidden box of jewelry that belongs to none of his family. On a shelf, they uncover an aviation map marked with dozens of tiny crosses scattered across remote riverbanks and clearings. Many of those marks line up with graves Halcombe already knows. That map raises the stakes. Each cross suggests another burial site, so troopers head into the ice and brush and dig where the marks point. Shallow graves appear, which confirms what the survivors said. Interrogation strips away Hansen's calm act, leading him behind bars with more victims being later recovered.
I'm going to ask the district attorney to petition the governor to reinstate the penalty. With all the bodies we'll find, he'll get it. So
I should have done when I had the chance!
The actual case followed a similar path, but with different names and numbers. Robert Hansen eventually claimed responsibility for 17 murders as part of a plea deal that required him to guide officers to burial sites. Yet the court still handed down Alaska's harshest sentence: more than 460 years plus life with no chance of parole. He died in prison in 2014. Insatiable thirst. In angst, a man walks out of prison on leave with one thing already pulling at him. He wants to again, and he wants a house where fear has nowhere to go.
Ich hatte schon einen konkreten Plan. Im Detail war alles klar. Jetzt war nur noch nötig, einen Menschen zu finden. Aber ich habe nicht gewusst, wo ich bin.
The film never gives him a name, which makes him feel less like a character and more like a danger anyone could meet on an ordinary day. Freedom winds him up fast. He drifts through town, watching people and replaying old violence in his head, so the urge builds instead of fading.
Ich habe überlegt, wie ich an sie herankommen kann. Mich hat das wahnsinnig aufgeregt. Ich habe mir sofort die tollsten Sachen vorgestellt. Aber im Espresso wäre das zu auffällig gewesen. Man hätte sofort alles gehört.
Eventually, he fixes on a house he believes is empty, decides it's the right place to finally act, and slips inside. However, the place is not empty at all. There's a disabled man in a wheelchair who mistakes him for his father, which gives the intruder room to stay. The moment the man's mother and sister walk through the door, the attacker gets into hunting mode. He tapes the daughter to a handle, attacks the mother, and drags the son upstairs toward the bathroom. Each move feeds his excitement because everyone in the house feels like weak prey. From there, his cruelty keeps rising. He drowns the son so there's no one left to interrupt him and returns downstairs where the mother is barely conscious. When the mother dies anyway, he moves straight toward the daughter. What follows is the film's most disturbing sequence. He chases her through the house, stabs her when she cannot run anymore, drinks her blood to push the high further, and collapses on top of the body once his own body gives out. By morning, he wakes up smeared with blood, like nothing about the situation is strange, and decide it is simply time to leave. He loads the 3 bodies into the family car, pulls the dog into the front seat, and drives off thinking he can use the corpses later to frighten new victims into submission. A small crash attracts attention, so he tries to stay unnoticed by stopping at a cafe and pretending to be a normal customer. The damaged car draws more eyes, which creates the crack he cannot control. Police show up, start asking questions, and curiosity about the trunk turns into fear the moment he opens it. He presents the bodies almost proudly, as if the reveal is part of the performance he had been building all night. The story draws inspiration from Australian killer Werner Kniesek, who used a short prison furlough in 1980 to murder a woman and her 2 adult children. He was sentenced to life inside a secure psychiatric unit, and public outrage over how easily he was released pushed Australia to tighten rules around prison leave and high-risk violent offenders. Pork buns and bones. The untold story starts with police doing a routine follow-up on a family who hasn't been heard from. Their search leads them back to the Eight Immortals restaurant, a place that looks completely ordinary at first glance. The tables are set, customers are eating, and nothing in the room hints that anything serious is wrong. Suddenly, a familiar face around the restaurant steps up and says he is in charge now. This is Wang Qiheng. He explains that the Changs went overseas and left the shop in his hands.
上次問你話唔知，今次問你話移民，你玩嘢啊？嚇！
唔係啊，我都係呢幾日先知佢哋全家移咗民啫嘛。喂，咁你知唔知佢移民咗去邊啊？唔係好清楚啊，唔知加拿大邊度啊，定係好遠㗎啦。
Because he moves behind the counter like he owns it, the police let the story ride for a while. Aside from the dining room, the case turns darker. Bags of human remains wash up near the beach and in local rubbish, so detectives know they're looking at rather than a simple disappearance. Forensics confirm there are several victims, yet none match a neat missing person file, which keeps the investigation drifting while Wong keeps ladling out pork buns. Time makes the silence around the Changs harder to ignore. Relatives contact police and say no one has heard from them, and restaurant money now flows through Wong instead of the family. And those details do not fit his cheerful story about an overseas move, so the Eight Immortals shifts in the officers' minds from a neutral backdrop to the most likely place where the family vanished. Each return visit to the restaurant lands heavier. The front room still looks harmless, but focus slides toward the kitchen, because that back area now feels like the missing bridge between a vanished household and the chopped-up bodies appearing around Macau. Once suspicion locks on to Wong, the tone snaps. Police follow him and haul him in. However, he refuses to admit anything and even flips the situation by showing bruises to reporters so he can paint the cops as thugs. That stunt forces the department to ease off in public, which pushes the real pressure into the interrogation room. And that pressure breaks Wong. His confession is direct and detailed, leaving no space for another version of events. With that on record, Wong is returned to his cell, but he cuts his wrists before prosecution. The real case followed a harsher track. In 1985, Huang Jiheng 10 members of the Zheng family and took over their restaurant in Macau. A conviction and life sentence followed, and incomplete remains and an active kitchen fed the rumor that victims' meat went into the pork buns. A claim never proven, but one that shaped the story the film leans on. Level 6. Mysterious Camp Disappearances. The Fields centers on two journalists, Dith Pran, a Cambodian journalist, and Sydney Schanberg, a reporter for the New York Times. Their work in Phnom Penh keeps them close as the city collapses under Khmer Rouge control. Once Khmer Rouge forces take over the capital, Schanberg evacuates with other foreigners while Pran is forced to stay because he has no diplomatic protection.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
This from family, sir.
You're from family?
Yeah. Sydney
I'm sorry, they've been through.
Sydney Sandberg.
They have been through.
Do check one more time, please.
They've been through.
You made a mistake, sir. Okay.
That split becomes the film's turning point because Pran now faces the same rules imposed on millions of Cambodians. The regime sends Pran into rural labor camps where survival depends on blending in. He hides his education, copies the behavior of villagers, and works non-stop because slipping out of line draws immediate punishment.
I'm full of fear, Sydney. I must show no understanding, not of French or English. I must have no past, Sydney. This is the year 0, and nothing has gone before.
Hunger worsens, disease spreads fast, and guards treat exhaustion as defiance, so every day feels like another test he has to pass quietly. That's when a walk beyond the work path exposes the truth he has been trying not to see. Pran steps into open ground filled with bones and skulls, and the sight explains why so many people vanish from the camps. These fields are execution sites disguised as farmland, so staying in place no longer feels like survival. This discovery pushes him to look for any chance to escape before he becomes another set of bones buried in the dirt. A new assignment places Pran in a small village run by a Khmer Rouge officer who keeps him close. Working under that command is risky, yet the position gives Pran the chance to study the area and wait for a real shift in power. Tension on the border grows as Vietnamese forces move closer, which weakens the grip that kept him trapped. The officer dies during one of those clashes, and that loss breaks the structure around Pran, giving him the opening he needs to slip away before the unit regroups. Escape turns into a long march toward the Thai border. Pran follows a rough map across fields and brush while patrols still sweep the countryside, so every step carries its own risk. Relief arrives only when the Red Cross camp comes into view. Aid workers rush toward him instead of guards, and that difference breaks him in a way nothing else has. News travels fast, and Schanberg flies in once he hears Pran is alive. Their reunion carries the emotional weight the film has been building toward. What the film leaves off-screen is Cambodia's long struggle to address the crimes behind those fields. Decades after Pron's real escape, a UN-backed tribunal convicted senior Khmer Rouge leaders for genocide and crimes against humanity. Cambodia later preserved sites such as Tuol Sleng and Chong Ek as public memorials, and UNESCO recognized them so the history they hold would not be lost or denied. Last lifeline. Sometimes in April, soldiers storm a Kigali all-girls Catholic school and order Martine, a teacher, to put her students in two lines, one for Hutu and one for Tutsi.
Okay, girls, listen to me. Come, listen. Now, they're going to ask you for your identity cards. They want to separate us. They want all Tutsis to come out.
Those labels were used by extremists to decide who to kill and who to spare. Martine understands exactly what that split means, so she refuses to point to a single girl. Her fear pushes the students to lock their arms together and insist they are one. Their unity turns a simple command into direct resistance, and the soldiers react with open gunfire. By morning, only a few survivors, including Martine, managed to crawl out through the swamp. The film cuts forward to 2004, where Augustine Muganza, a father still searching for answers about his daughter, walks through the same boarding school now preserved as a memorial. He moves past empty desks, damaged chalkboards, and walls lined with names, seeing exactly where she once sat. That visit ends quickly when a letter from his brother Honoré pushes him to Arusha. Augustine goes there not for closure, but for the truth. At the tribunal, Honoré admits that his work at RTLM helped guide militias to specific homes and churches, turning radio words into death sentences.
What I want to say is that it took time for me to realize that what I had been accused of may have been true, and that what I had participated in.
That confession sets up the film's final escalation, which takes place in a village Gakaka hearing. The judge asks whether anyone recognizes the men accused of pulling girls out of the dorms. And Martine bravely rises from the crowd and names those men. In real life, the scale was far larger. Over roughly 100 days in 1994, at which about 800,000 people were in Rwanda, mostly Tutsi and many moderate Hutu. After the genocide, senior planners were tried at the UN tribunal in Arusha, while Rwanda used Gakaka courts for local cases so communities could hear confessions and decide how to live beside the people who had once stood at the roadblocks. A city left to rot. In Black Sun, the Nanking Massacre, the story hits its breaking point when the eldest son returns home and walks straight into a scene straight out of a nightmare. His parents laid with his grandmother barely conscious while Japanese soldiers move through the house as if they own it. And before the son can react, the soldiers spot him, killing him instantly. His younger brother and sister come back later with no sense of the danger inside. Once the girl is spotted at her doorstep, the soldiers drag her inside while the brother freezes outside. Their grandmother sees what's coming and chooses the only way she believes will save him. She forces him out of the house, closes the door, and starts a fire that spreads through the rooms. The boy watches from the street as the house collapses with everyone else still inside. After that, the violence spreads across Nanjing in December 1937 during the Second Sino-Japanese War, right after the city fell. Some Chinese soldiers ditch uniforms and try to pass as civilians because capture now looks like a death sentence. Japanese patrols react by pulling groups aside and shooting them on the spot. Homes across Nanjing face another threat as soldiers search rooms for valuables. Whenever they find women hiding there, the situation turns violent. Some residents try to reach the safety zone because foreign volunteers stand at the gates and argue with soldiers to keep people alive. Patrols sweep through those same areas, so attempts to flee often push people straight back toward harm. By the final minutes, Black Sun stays committed to that blunt style. Scenes play out without dramatic pauses, and the city feels stripped of anything that once made it livable. In real life, the in Nanjing lasted about 6 weeks, and the scale of shocked even people who learned about it years later. Modern research places the deaths in the hundreds of thousands, and accounts from survivors describe widespread attacks on civilians throughout the city. Level 7. Till death do us part. In Sada Abe sits in a small inn room watching her lover Kichizo Ishida sleep. He's heavy with sedatives and barely moves, so when she starts to tighten a sash around his neck, he has no idea what she is doing. The scene feels even worse because of how calm it looks. The two of them have already spent days shut away from everyone else, drinking and making out, so when he talks about going back to his wife and his routine, she only hears that he's about to leave her. On one twisted day, Sada pawned some clothes to buy a real kitchen knife, telling herself it will show Ishida how far she was ready to go to keep him. Now that knife rests within reach while Ishida sleeps beside her. His each slow breath reminds her that he has another life waiting for him. Eventually, the sash they once used during intimacy becomes her weapon. Sada tightens it slowly. Ishida is in half asleep, so his body barely responds. When he stops responding, a strange calm moves in Sada because now he finally belongs to her alone. After that, she straightens the bedding and adjusts his clothes as if he's still alive. When daylight comes, that makeshift trance finally breaks. Staff knock on the door, forcing her to act. She leaves Ishida there and moves around cheap inns with fake names. Every new room reminds her she is living inside the consequences of that night. Back at the inn, silence from Ishida's room starts to worry the staff, so they eventually enter it and find his body. The news quickly spreads into the streets. Papers print every detail they can find, and the search for Abe Sada quickly becomes a public obsession. Once police catch up to her, she does not deny what happened and receives a 6-year sentence. In real life, Sada Abe walked out of prison after about 5 years. She even wrote an autobiography later and slipped into quieter corners of Japan under new names. Over time, the case stopped being just a crime story and turned into a kind of legend. Last dinner. In Kaniba, Issei Sagawa sits in a cramped room and calmly talks about and a woman in Paris while his younger brother Jun sits beside him. The ease in Sagawa's voice and barely changing expressions during the conversation is what makes this scene disturbing.
デパートで階段から落ちて流産してその時に血だとか肉だとかいっぱい出た。それは自分の体だと感じたことがあります。
He adds how these fantasies had followed him since childhood and only grew stronger with time, drifting between real memories and imaginative thoughts. And that mix leaves the audience confused on what the truth is. Sagawa eventually recalls when he lived alone in Paris. He had invited a Dutch classmate to his apartment to help him with recordings, when in reality he wanted to harm her. So he raised a rifle while her back was turned and shot her, ending her life.
I don't want to, but I couldn't find any way to eat the girl's meat fresh, so I thought I have to.
As he continues, the focus turns to the books and comics he later created that retold the crime and the TV appearances built around his notoriety. When the film cuts back to the small room and the frail body of Sagawa, that contrast makes the segment feel even more disturbing. The same man who treated the crime as material for fame now sits broken and dependent, yet still talks about thoughts as if they never really left. In real life, French courts declared Issei Sagawa legally insane, which prevented a criminal trial and placed him in psychiatric custody. France later approved his transfer to Japan, but prosecutors could not charge him because French officials refused to release the full case file. Shockingly, in 1986, he walked free and spent decades using the crime for media work, never facing a trial for René Hartveldt's death. Hello Kitty's Dark Secret. In Human Pork Chop and There Is a Secret in My Soup, everything builds to one image. Police walk into a dirty Hong Kong flat and start picking through the mess until a huge cartoon cat doll grabs their attention. It looks ridiculous in the middle of that room, but when they finally open it and see a human skull inside the plush head, the whole story snaps into place. Both films stretch out the lead up to that reveal. Officers push deeper into the apartment and follow the smell until they start finding signs that something terrible had happened. The men inside keep saying the missing woman has gone away, so the only proof of what they did was hidden somewhere in that same cramped space. That plot hits harder once we know how the real case sits behind it. In 1999, nightclub hostess Fan Mei-yi became involved with triad associate Chan Man-lok. She had grown up in an orphanage and later used nightclub and work to survive while fighting addiction. At one point, she took about 4,000 Hong Kong dollars from Chan's wallet. Even though she paid the money back, he still demanded extra interest she couldn't manage, turning a small theft into a test of his control. Chan chose punishment instead of letting the debt fade. In March 1999, he turned up at Fan's home with two friends and a 14-year-old runaway named Fang, who was already living under his control. The two adults forced Fan out of the building so they could take her to a rental flat. Later statements described a plan where she would stay there and work under their control to clear what she owed. Once the door closed, that flat stopped being a workplace and turned into a private prison. Reports describe repeated beatings and basic care being withheld. The men were often high on which only escalated the violence. As Fan's body grew weaker with no help, the damage caught up. She ultimately died in that room with no way to show what had been done to her. After her death, her captors now faced a different risk. A dead woman in a small flat they rented could easily point the blame on them. To avoid that, they dismembered the body, most of which went out with the rubbish. Disturbingly, they kept her skull and pushed it into a large Hello Kitty mermaid doll. And they left the toy sitting in the apartment like a trophy. After Fan's death, the men let Fang drift away to reduce attention. The flat might have stayed a rumor if not for Fang. She wasn't the murderer, but had witnessed the aftermath firsthand while living under fear and intimidation. Once she was placed in a girl's home, staff noticed she kept talking about a dead woman. Finally, in May 1999, Fang led police to Flat 3B, and inside, officers found the dirty plush cat that held Fan's skull along with a few other parts. Fang's testimony is what exposed the crime, turning mere rumors into one of Hong Kong's most infamous Hello Kitty cases. Cases like this show how sometimes harmless-looking things can hide the worst truths, which is why we also broke down how films use that same idea to create the most disturbing movie deaths.